Oh, look, J-Lo in another rom-com. But this time it's with grumpy Brit Brett Goldstein. Office romance is risque and NSFW, but is it any good? Jackie, the president and CEO of Cruz, runs a tight ship, including a rigid anti-fraternization policy for all employees. When a new sexy lawyer begins working for her, that policy becomes very tested. Now, I don't think it's anything new to see J-Lo in a rom-com, but for this, the role was specifically written for her so that she could be a strong and successful leader rather than someone who works for the uppity-ups and only has aspirations of greatness. Brett Goldstein co-wrote this with his Ted Lasso compadre Joe Kelly, and they wanted to approach the typical rom-com completely differently. Now, it's not uncommon to have raunchy or risque rom-coms, but typically they involve 20-something-year-old actors who are immature and then only go for the dick and butt jokes for the basest of laughs. The comedy here, now it is still something that will make the typical 13-year-old boy chuckle, but it's also more intelligently written and then combined with actors who know exactly how to nail the timing as they potentially nail each other. Now, I'm not always a fan of crass comedy, especially when it's just using that as the sole basis to create laughs, but so much of this comedy works because it's witty dialogue that's paired with facial expressions and body movements that complement it. Lopez and Goldstein, they're great with these deliveries, typically leaning into the fumbling and awkward interactions that make them endearing. But the standout for expressive hilarity, that's Betty Gilpin. Whenever she's on screen, which is quite often, you cannot take your eyes off her because she is twisting her mouth, squaring her jaw, narrowing her eyes, and then spouting some slyly biting dialogue that all melds together for comedy gold. Now, I laughed out loud a bunch during this movie, which surprised me because rom-coms, they're all fairly similar. And this doesn't break the tried and true progression of the meet cute, then infatuation, to some flirting, a connection and or hookup, some sort of conflict, and then a happy everybody wins resolution. I don't list these as negatives either. They're tried and true because they work. But what makes one rom-com stand out above the others is its ability to do all of that similar process, but in a fresh or unique manner. And while I don't think this is overly unique, it does feel fresh just thanks to the ever-present disdain that shoots from Gilpin's snarky character and then the way Lopez and Goldstein connect. They have excellent chemistry, so much so that it feels as though they could be dating in real life. The banter and connection come across as genuine. And while I'm not surprised with this about Goldstein, I am a little bit with Lopez. Now, before you start smashing your keyboard with hate, I'm not saying that Lopez is bad. She's just very similar in pretty much all of her rom-coms. Now sure, the character status or position here is different, with this role giving her more power in the relationship. But it's not just the roles that are similar in many of her comedies, it's also her presence. She doesn't create a ton of dynamic range between the performances so that you can readily differentiate between all of her different roles. It's kind of like with Ryan Reynolds. He's basically Deadpool in just about every movie he's appeared in since that anti-superhero movie. So if you're a fan, it works. But if you're looking for variety, especially with J-Lo's performance, there's not much, if any. Again, though, despite that, the duo are charming when together, which is also for almost the entirety of the movie. And speaking of that, the movie is surprisingly long, but I didn't feel the time. It's just short of 2 hours, which normally violates the golden rule of the 90-minute rom-com. But because the pair are lovingly adorable and then the humor keeps hitting, the pace is efficient. That's not to say, though, that some areas are either underdeveloped or somewhat unnecessary. There's a central conflict of a lawsuit that is used as the MacGuffin to get the two working closely, but it's thin and sparsely addressed topic. We're given just enough information to keep the arc from coming out of nowhere, but there's no depth to that angle at all. There's also the relationship between J-Lo and her dad, who's played by Edward James Olmos. Now, with Olmos, he's being underutilized for this story. He pops in about 3 times to spout a few lines and then is gone again for large portions of the story. And yeah, I know that he's not the focus, but there is a moment when he and Lopez have this tough conversation, and it just doesn't feel earned thanks to the lack of interaction that we've been shown. So if you are a fan of rom-coms, this is an easy watch. The shared charisma, laugh-out-loud antics, and a couple that we want to root for, they all work together to deliver everything that works. If you're only so-so into the genre, you may enjoy this for the unconventional sequences that push some boundaries while also maintaining a quick and witty pace. Brett Goldstein and Jennifer Lopez, they're wonderful together, and despite the similarities within J-Lo's other rom-com performances, they create an endearing couple who convincingly can't keep their hands or mouths, or other body parts off of each other. And if you choose to watch the film, make sure that you don't back out of the credits too early. There's an extended mid-credit scene that takes a bit from the movie that features Tony Hale, and then it plays that out to the extreme. There's sex, some nudity, ton of profanity, and no violence. I give Office Romance 4 out of 5 couches. Okay, so what would be your desert island rom-com? If you were stranded on an island and could only watch one rom-com for the rest of your life, and then don't come at me with logical questions concerning electricity or devices to watch the said movie on. Now, I'd choose What's Up, Doc from 1974, but let me know your choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.